Tonight we've got a sweet collection of calming bedtime stories to help kids sleep. Let's get cozy and drift off together. Before we do, could you please tap subscribe? By doing this small thing, you'll let YouTube know you love what we do. Let's get ourselves cozy, snuggle down, and I'll begin. Here's The Sleep Machine by Karina Price. Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, lived a girl named Sydney. She was a friendly girl and loved spending time with her pet animals. She had a long-eared black rabbit called Buster, a bushy-tailed tabby cat called Betty, a 10-year-old turtle named Billy, and a rescue dog called Benji. Sydney loved everything beginning with the letter B. Playing with a bat and ball, blowing bubbles, bouncy castles, and balloons. She was especially excited about something else that begins with a B, and it's something Sydney celebrates once a year. Can you guess what it is? That's right, her birthday, and her next one was coming up in 5 days. In fact, Sydney was so happy about her birthday in 5 days' time that it was all she could think about day and night. She knew it was going to be the best birthday ever. She was going to invite all her friends to her birthday party, and there would be a huge chocolate birthday cake covered in yummy blue icing. Sydney hoped she would get a new blue dress and a glitterball Barbie, and perhaps a glow-in-the-dark bouncing ball. Sydney loved thinking about her birthday, and this was a little distracting at school. She tried super hard to concentrate during her lessons, but she found herself daydreaming about her brilliant birthday plans, and she began to write a list of all the fun games she would play at her party. Just as she was carefully writing her list, her teacher, Mrs. Wigglebottom, noticed what Sydney was doing and said, "Sydney, I know you're excited about your birthday, but I need you to pay full attention to your schoolwork during lesson time. You can think about your birthday later." Sydney apologised and put her list away. She would work on it later. She had lots of birthday plans to make. She did her best to concentrate on her schoolwork, but the thought of her birthday was never far from her mind. Later that day, Sydney was in her garden, playing ball with her dog, Benji. She was telling him all about her birthday plans and what it was going to be like when she turned 7. Sydney said, "Benji, it's going to be so much fun because when I turn 7, I'm going to be 1 year closer to being a grown-up, which means I can make very important decisions. And I have already decided that I'm going to be able to eat as many sweets as I want, whenever I want to." Sydney smiled at her lovely dog. "When I'm bigger, I'll go to bed at whatever time I want to. Bedtime's is so boring because all I do is sleep when I could be having lots of fun playing with you and Buster, Billy, and Betty." Sydney continued telling Benji about all the fun things that would happen when she was 7 years old, and he gladly listened, wagging his long golden tail and jumping up to catch his ball at every opportunity. Later that evening, after her bedtime story, Sydney's dad dimmed her bedroom lights and tucked her into bed. He said softly, "Snuggle down now, Sydney. Good night. Sweet dreams." He kissed her good night. "Good night, Dad. See you in the morning." She smiled excitedly as she remembered there were only 5 more sleeps until her birthday. As Sydney lay in her bed, cuddling her fluffy bear, Bo, she started to think about her birthday. She thought about her birthday cake and wondered how big it would be. Maybe it would be the biggest birthday cake in the world, as tall as a house and covered in superhero figurines with flashing lights, and maybe every slice of delicious cake would be a different flavor. Chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, rainbow delight. Yum. How scrumptious. She smiled as she continued thinking about the cake. A while later, Sydney looked at her Barry the Lamb bedside clock and realized she had been thinking about her birthday cake for over an hour. She knew she should go to sleep because it was school the next day and she didn't want to be tired and sleepy during her lessons. Sydney gently closed her eyes and settled down into her cozy bed. She cuddled her soft, fluffy bear, Bo. She was so very cozy in her bed and so very relaxed. She told herself that as soon as she fell asleep, she would be one day closer to her birthday. That lovely thought made her relax even more. But just as Sydney started to relax more and more, she suddenly wondered whether she would get the best birthday present in the world. A baby bunny, a little playmate for her rabbit Buster. The thought was so big in her mind that it was all she could think about. She became more and more excited as she imagined what it would be like to receive a fluffy bunny for her birthday, and how lovely it would feel to hold the cute baby in her arms. Sydney was so happy about the little bunny that she just couldn't sleep. It was getting later and later, and all she could think about was her birthday cake, party games, presents, and all the fun things that she'd be able to do when she turned 7. She knew she had to try her best to settle down and go to sleep. Sydney's dad came into her bedroom to check on her. When he noticed she was still awake, he said, "Sydney, it's way past your bedtime. It's time for you to go to sleep now." "I have an idea. This always worked for me when I was your age. Focus on your Barry the Lamb bedside clock, and in your head, count every time that Barry jumps over the clouds. As the seconds pass by, and with every number you count, you will feel more and more sleepy." Sydney said that sounded like a great idea and she would try it. Sydney settled down and got nice and comfortable. As she rested her head on her pillow, uncrossing her legs and resting her hands on her belly, she began to count. 1, breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. 2, noticing the feeling of her body resting there on her bed. 3, feeling more and more relaxed with every number. 4, nice and easy. 5, her eyes feeling so relaxed, knowing it's okay to close them for a moment or two. 6, no need to try to fall asleep, Her body knows when it's the right time to fall asleep now. 7, safe and sound. 8, nice and relaxed. 9, relaxing more and more. 10, her eyes feeling heavier and heavier now. Sydney noticed that she felt nice and relaxed, and it felt so lovely and cozy as her body sunk into her bed, like a great, big, warm hug. Her eyes started to slowly close, and she could feel herself just about to fall asleep and enter a lovely dreamland. But just as Sydney was about to go to sleep, she wondered whether her parents would remember to get her a big blue birthday badge, as she was keen to wear it to school on her birthday. Sydney's eyes opened wide and she sat up and started to jot notes down in her birthday notebook. Before she knew it, she was all excited and wide awake again. What would help her get to sleep? Just then a super-duper awesome idea popped into Sydney's head, and she knew what would help her to feel ever so relaxed and sleepy. She was going to create a dreamy sleep machine, and it would make her fall asleep very quickly. She picked up her green and blue dinosaur book and began to swiftly scribble in it. After a while, Sydney placed her notebook and pencil down beside her and smiled. She had designed her super dreamy sleep machine, and all she had to do was build it without waking up her parents. And with that, Sydney hopped out of bed and began building her sleep machine. She quietly tiptoed around the bedroom, gently gathering all the special things needed. 5 cuddly teddy bears, 3 bedtime storybooks, 2 snuggly throws, 1 large soft lavender sleep pillow, 10 dreamy glow-in-the-dark stars, her box of happy memories, and her special relaxation box. Sydney carefully balanced all her sleepy things onto various boxes, gently stuck them all together, and quietly sprinkled rainbow glitter on top. And just like magic, she had created a fabulous sleep machine. Sydney picked up her teddy bear and whispered to him, "Right, Bo, my wonderful sleep machine has 4 different dreamy levels to help me feel lovely and relaxed. I'm looking forward to drifting into a wonderfully relaxing deep sleep, happily dreaming of my amazing birthday. Let's get started." Sydney carefully stepped into level 1 of the sleep machine. It was like a snuggly den. 2 soft, blue snuggly blankets lined the floor, along with 2 lovable bears. The warm yellow glow of the moon-shaped fairy lights made it feel especially cozy, and the soothing lavender pillow helped to calm Sydney's busy birthday thoughts. She said, "Ah, I feel so relaxed and happy here, Bo. I'm going to try my best not to close my eyes and fall asleep too quickly, as I really want to show you the next level, Bo. Try not to fall asleep now." Sydney started to feel very sleepy, and just as she was about to fall into a deep sleep, The sleep machine started to make some very strange noises. It was burping and hiccuping very loudly. Sydney wondered where the noise was coming from. Burp, burp, hiccup, hiccup, grumbled the sleep machine in a deep voice. Excuse me, but I always have a funny belly whenever I drink too much milk. Sydney looked at her teddy bear and told him she must be dreaming because her sleep machine was talking to her. The sleep machine spoke again and said, I am a talking sleep machine. I'm not really allowed to talk as I might keep you awake, but I heard it was your birthday soon. I'm very excited about this. Shall we discuss your birthday plans? Sydney shook her head and told the machine she had created it so that she could fall asleep nice and easily. She picked up the remote control and turned down the volume on the machine. Sydney then picked up Bo and they carefully climbed up to the second level of the sleep machine. She told the bear he was going to love the next level because she had made it especially for him. The next level was a dreamlike place with glittery glow-in-the-dark stars and a calming bedtime story playing in the background. Sydney cuddled Bo and placed a soft weighted blanket over their legs and belly. She noticed the soft feeling of her body relaxing into the surface underneath her. Yawned Sydney. I can't stop yawning. It feels so safe and relaxing here. My legs are starting to feel heavy and relaxed. My arms are feeling heavy and relaxed, so nicely relaxed. But I wouldn't want to go to sleep too quickly now, as I want to show you the next level, Bo. Ah! Just then the sleep machine started to shake and vibrate. It made Sydney wobble all over the place. She didn't know what was happening. The sleep machine continued to wiggle and shake, and the calming bedtime story switched off, and noisy party music bellowed out of the speaker instead. The sleep machine began to cheerfully sing, If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Sydney politely asked the machine to stop singing and said she was trying to fall asleep. The machine stopped singing and said, I'm so sorry. I noticed that you were feeling more and more tired, and your eyes were gently closing, and you looked so nicely relaxed. And then I suddenly thought of your birthday. I couldn't resist having a little dance. Would you like to have a boogie with me? It will be fun. No, thank you, Sydney replied. It's time to settle down and go to sleep now. I'm going to turn off the party music and switch off the boogie button. It's sleepy time now. Sydney gently picked up Bo and slowly climbed up to level 3 of the sleep machine. Okay, Bo, this is the happy memory level. Let's have a look at the special book that I've made with all my happy memories in it. Sydney put the bear on her lap and opened her happy memory book. Inside it were pictures she had drawn of her family, her friends, and all her pets. There were also some photographs her parents had taken of the special times in her life, photos of her previous birthdays, days out with her family, sunny days in the garden with her friends, and lots more. Her favourite picture was one of Bo that she had made when she was only 3 years old. She had received Bo as a birthday present and had fallen in love with him as soon as she'd seen him. She still loved her fluffy teddy bear with all her heart, and seeing the picture in her book made her feel all warm and peaceful inside. She looked at Bo and could tell he was feeling the same way too. Sydney and Bo looked at more pictures of all the happy times in their lives. Sydney felt more and more happy and warm inside, and sleepy too. She began to yawn. Sydney put the book down and wrapped Bo up in a fluffy blanket. She cuddled him gently. She loved him so much. Thinking about her family, her friends, and her lovely pets made her relax. She kissed Bo on the tip of his nose and told him it was time for sleep now. Sydney noticed the top of her head felt lovely and relaxed, and then she felt a calm, warm feeling moving down to her shoulders, down her back and belly, relaxation moving all the way down her arms, hands, legs, feeling nice and relaxed all the way down to her feet and toes, feeling so nice and relaxed. Her eyes were starting to feel heavier and heavier, and she was enjoying the feeling of drifting and dreaming, drifting and dreaming. Sydney was just about to go into a wonderfully deep sleep when suddenly she heard a peculiar rumbling noise. "Oh my goodness, what is that silly noise, Bo?" asked Sydney sleepily. Sydney was very puzzled as she had no idea where the noise was coming from. The funny noise sounded out again, and Sydney knew where it was coming from. It was the sleep machine yet again. She quietly called out to the machine and asked it to be quiet. The machine giggled and said, "Sorry, but I couldn't resist trying out some new funny sounds. Shall we do silly voices at your birthday party next week and make your friends laugh? It will be so much fun." "No, thank you," Sydney said sleepily. "I really want to go to sleep now, and I'm feeling nice and relaxed and so sleepy. And you keep doing silly things and stopping me from going to sleep now." "I'm so sorry," the machine said. "I promise not to tease you and Bo again. Settle down now and close your eyes. But try not to go to sleep too soon, as you still have Dreamy level 4 of the sleep machine to experience. and I have heard that this is where you can easily fall asleep now. No need to rush. Simply close your eyes and settle down, and your body will help you to relax when the time is time. No need to try. So safe here, gently relaxing into your bed now. Even though Sydney was feeling ever so tired now, she was super keen to show Bo the sleepy machine's dreamy level 4. She told Bo he would love the next level because it was a special place where you could program the machine to give you wonderful dreams. And those dreams could take you anywhere in the world, even up to the stars in the night sky. Sydney gently picked up Bo and drowsily walked up to dreamy level 4. It was a blissful colour of the night sky, lots of purples, midnight blues, and the multicoloured patterns of a lava lamp as it leisurely swirled around and around, around and around. It's so nice and peaceful here, Bo. All we need to do is lie down and think about what lovely dreams we would like to have as we sleep now. As Sydney relaxed amongst her soft teddies, snuggly blankets, and relaxing pillows, she started to think about all the wonderful things that she loved, beginning with her favourite letter B. I'd really love to dream about all the things that make me happy, beginning with B. My favourite bear, Bo, Benji, the dog, Buster, the rabbit, Betty, the cat, Billy, the turtle, playing bat and ball, blowing big bubbles. And as Sydney began thinking of all these wonderful things, she started to feel more and more sleepy, and her eyes started to relax, and she slowly started to fall asleep now, nice and relaxed. But just as Sydney was falling into a wonderful, dreamy sleep, the sleep machine couldn't resist waking her up. Birthday, birthday. You were thinking of all the wonderful things beginning with the letter B, and you forgot birthday. Oh, I do love this letter game, said the sleep machine cheerfully. Sydney suddenly woke up, and she wasn't impressed with the sleep machine at all. She said, Right, that's it, sleep machine. I have given you so many chances, but every time I get nice and relaxed and feel so sleepy, you do something silly. I'm going to pack you away and go to sleep in my cozy bed now. Please, don't pack me away. I promise not to be silly anymore, pleaded the sleep machine. But Sydney didn't listen to the sleep machine, as she was feeling ever so tired and sleepy now. So she carefully packed away her sleep machine and said it could come to her birthday party and entertain her friends with its fun, silly games. Sydney then slowly climbed into her bed and snuggled under her blanket, cuddling Bo. She happily rested her head on her pillow and continued to think about all the things that made her happy, beginning with the letter B, and her eyes gently closed as she restfully drifted into a wonderful dream. She dreamt of opening her birthday presents and having lots of fun with her friends, playing party games and eating lots of delicious birthday cake. Sydney also dreamt of her sleep machine, dancing and singing and making her friends laugh at her birthday party. What a wonderful dream. So nicely relaxed, safe and sound. Good night, Sydney. Good night, Bo. This is The Dragon Who Loved to Dance by Gillian Rogerson. High on a mountaintop in Sleepy Forest, a baby dragon was getting ready to hatch from its egg. The parents of the dragon held hands and waited for their little one to appear. A single crack zigzagged down the glittering purple surface of the egg. The mother dragon said, "Oh, I wonder what our baby will look like. I wonder if they'll know how to fly." The father dragon smiled. Dragons are born knowing how to fly. Another crack ran down the egg. "What shall we call our little one?" the mother dragon asked. "We still haven't decided on a name yet." The father dragon replied wisely, "As soon as we see our baby, we'll know which name is perfect for them." A third crack appeared on the egg and ran all the way around it. The purple egg began to jiggle from side to side, as though the little dragon inside just could not wait another minute to get out. The egg rolled over and broke completely open. A baby dragon, with skin the colour of freshly opened leaves, jumped up and smiled up at his parents. His proud parents looked into his emerald green eyes and fell totally in love with him. To their surprise, their son began to do something quite unexpected. The little dragon shuffled his feet along the ground, waved his arms in the air, and wiggled his little dragon bottom. The mother dragon whispered, "What's he doing?" "I'm not sure," the father dragon whispered back. "Maybe he's got an itch that he needs to scratch." The confused parents looked more closely at their beautiful son. The little dragon nodded his head in time to a silent rhythm and tapped his feet on the ground. He clicked his fingers and began to hum a joyful tune. Then he jigged from side to side and kicked his legs in the air. He waved happily at his parents as he moved around. His mother and father waved back, but they didn't know why their son was moving in such a peculiar way. Just at that moment, a beautiful owl landed on the branch of a nearby tree. She fluffed her white feathers and settled herself more comfortably on the branch. She smiled at the parents and said congratulations to them on the birth of their son. The parents kept their eyes on their son, but moved closer to the owl and asked if she knew what he was doing. "Dancing," the owl replied, "and very good he is too. He's got a good rhythm going on there. Look at him go. He's making me want to dance too." The owl started to bop up and down on the branch. The mother dragon said, "But dragons don't dance. We fly, and we walk, and sometimes we run if we have to, but mainly we fly." The owl gave the parents a knowing look. "You used to dance, don't you remember? Didn't you two meet at a moonlight disco years ago? Isn't that where you fell in love with each other?" A dreamy look came into the parents' eyes, and they gazed fondly at each other. The mother dragon said, "Oh yes, we did meet at a moonlight disco. I've been so busy flying here, there, and everywhere that I've forgotten we used to dance." "Your son was born with a love of dance in his heart," the owl said. "Has he got a name?" "Oh, we forgot about that," the father dragon said. "But I have the perfect name for him." The parents went over to their dancing son and held out their arms to him. The little dragon danced over to them and into their arms. In a voice full of love, the father dragon said, "Disco. Your name is Disco. We've been waiting all day for you to come out of your egg." Disco repeated his name. He grinned, nodded, and said his name a few more times, as if he couldn't get enough of it. Then he jumped out of his parents' embrace and began to dance around the broken eggshell, whilst singing his name over and over again, and clicking his fingers and tapping his toes. The sight of their happy son made the mother and father dragon laugh in delight. They attempted to join in with his dancing moves, but they couldn't quite remember what to do and gave up after a while. Disco danced a little longer before flopping to the ground and falling fast asleep. The next day, the proud parents introduced Disco to the other dragons who lived on the mountain. Disco shyly said hello to the gathering of dragons, and then he began to dance. He just couldn't help himself. His feet just had to hop from side to side. His arms just had to wave back and forth. And his body just had to twirl and whirl around. The other dragons were astonished and asked the parents what Disco was doing. "Dancing," Mother Dragon replied, with a loving smile on her face. "But dragons don't dance," an elderly dragon said. "We fly, and we walk, and sometimes we run if we have to, but mainly we fly." Mother Dragon nodded. "That's what I thought, but then I remembered that we all used to dance. But we were so busy flying here, there, and everywhere that we forgot how to. Do you remember how to dance? The elderly dragon frowned, as though searching for a memory. He said, I'm not sure. Did we really dance? Mother Dragon nodded. We did. Disco was born knowing how to dance. He's got a natural rhythm in his heart, one that we all have. I keep trying to copy him, but my feet trip over each other. But I'm certain I'll remember how to dance again soon. The elderly dragon smiled. I hope I remember too. Look at the fun Disco is having. The little dragon continued dancing and added a few wiggles and jiggles. He shimmied back and forth along the ground, humming happily to himself. Such was the joy on his little face that the other dragons began to smile. Some of them even tried to dance too, but they kept bumping into each other and had to keep saying sorry. Disco kindly showed them some of his simpler moves, but that didn't work either, and two young dragons ended up with their tails somehow tied together. The elderly dragon said, I can see how good Disco is at dancing, but can he fly? Oh, we forgot about that, Mother Dragon said. Father Dragon asked Disco if he would like to learn how to fly. Disco said he would like that very much. His parents took him to the edge of the mountain and showed him how to open his wings and flap them back and forth. Disco copied them and soon found a rhythm in the flapping of his wings. His feet jigged merrily from side to side, as though dancing to the movement of his wings. When he was ready, his parents showed Disco how to soar into the sky. Disco's little face frowned in concentration as he launched himself into the air. The wind rushed beneath his wings and took him higher and higher. The little dragon smiled. He veered to the left and then to the right. Flying was amazing, totally amazing, and Disco loved it. He looked down and realized he could see the whole of Sleepy Forest below him. He saw lots of forest animals. Some were moving through the long grass, and others were grazing in the flower meadows. A few were wallowing happily in the rivers, and some were asleep in the trees. To his surprise and delight, he noticed some elephants were actually dancing. Disco had never seen anyone else dance before. He swooped a bit lower to get a better look. The group of dancing elephants saw him and waved their trunks in a cheery hello. Disco waved back. The need to dance was too strong for Disco to resist. He flew to the nearest mountain and landed on top of it. He folded his wings behind his back and began to boogie and bop. He twisted and twirled this way and that, and waved his arms around in the air. He hummed a happy tune. It was a melody that came straight from his heart. His parents landed next to him and watched lovingly as their little dancing dragon boogied cheerfully on the mountaintop. He was a joy to watch. After a while, the dragon family took to the skies again. But even though Disco loved flying with his parents, the second they landed, he began to dance. He just couldn't help it. His parents loved flying with their son too, but they could see how much his face lit up with pure happiness every time he danced. After discussing the matter between themselves, they came up with an idea. That evening, as the dragon family were roasting marshmallows on an open fire, the mother dragon smiled fondly at Disco and said, "We've been thinking about how much you love dancing." With his cheeks full of warm marshmallows, Disco nodded. He did love dancing very much. Mother Dragon continued, "And we thought it would be wonderful if you met other animals who love dancing too. Perhaps you could even dance with them." Disco quickly swallowed the marshmallows. "Really? I would love that. When we were flying earlier, I saw some dancing elephants down in the forest. I'd love to meet them. Do you think they'd like to meet me?" "Of course they would," his father said. "You are an amazing little dragon with a very special talent." His mother said, "You should fly down to the forest tomorrow and meet those elephants. You might meet other animals who can dance too. And when you come back home later, you can show us any new moves you've learned. Perhaps the right dance will help us remember how to dance again." Disco promised to learn as many new dances as he could. He was sure one of them would be perfect for his parents. Early the next morning, Disco said goodbye to his parents and set off on his dancing adventure. He flew over the tops of the snow-capped mountains and swooped down to the forest. He landed near the elephants who were dancing again. The elephants didn't notice the dragon at first because they were too absorbed in the dance they were doing. The elephants had arranged themselves into a circle, and as they jigged to the left and then to the right, their long trunks waved joyfully in the air. An older elephant was sitting in the shade of a tree, playing a merry tune on a big drum. Disco watched the elephants as they shimmied to the right and then skipped to the left, moving in perfect time to the beat of the drum. Before too long, Disco felt the rhythm catching a hold of him. His feet began to tap, and his fingers clicked in time to the music. He moved closer to the elephants and watched their skipping feet. One of the smaller elephants noticed him, and with a smile she made space for Disco in the circle. Disco grinned happily and joined the dancing elephants. His steps were in perfect time with theirs, and he even added a little wiggle and whirl now and again. The elephants noticed his fancy moves and copied him. Soon, the elephants and the dragon had made up a completely new dance. When the dance had finished, Disco introduced himself and said thank you to the elephants for letting him join them. The small elephant said, "That was our first dance of the day. We're going to do another one now. You can join us if you like." "Do you know how to do the conga?" Disco said he didn't, but he liked the sound of it. The elephants organized themselves into a line, with Disco in the middle. Using their trunks, tails, and in Disco's case, their wings, the animals made a long line that stretched back into the trees. The elephant with the drum began to tap out an upbeat rhythm on his instrument, and off the animals went, dancing the conga through the forest. 4 steps and a kick to the left. 4 steps and a kick to the right. Disco picked up the movements in no time. It was a wonderfully happy dance, and it made him laugh with utter joy. He thought about the dragons back on the mountain, and was certain they'd be able to do the conga dance too. He would teach them the moves later. The elephants and the little dragon congaed through the forest with the drumming elephant jigging behind them, never once losing the beat on his drum. After a while, the elephants came to a stop, and the largest one told Disco their dancing was over for the day. But if Disco wanted to find more animals who loved dancing, he should visit the porcupine family, because they would be doing their morning ballet soon. They told him which way to go through the forest. Disco thanked the elephants again, and then went on his way. He had no idea what ballet was, but he'd find out soon. A few minutes later, he found the porcupine family. There were 5 of them, and they were standing on their tiptoes and gently twirling on the spot. They slowly swayed to the left and then to the right. Their arms held out elegantly, reaching to the sky. Disco thought they looked very graceful, and he was certain he'd never be able to move like that. The mother porcupine noticed the little dragon and welcomed him warmly. She said, "Are you the dancing dragon? I've seen you dancing on the mountain tops." Disco nodded. "I love dancing, but I don't think I could do what you're doing, though." She smiled at him and said, "You don't know until you try. Watch what I do and do the same." She held her arms out and waved them gently in the air, like ripples on a river. Disco copied her movements, and to his surprise, he discovered he was rather good at it. The porcupines showed him some more ballet moves, and even though some were trickier than others, Disco tried his best and did very well. He had a wonderful time. When the ballet dancing came to an end, the porcupines asked the little dragon to show them some of his dance moves. Disco boogied and shimmied. He whirled and he twirled. He bopped skipped and hopped to his own beat. The porcupines followed his moves and mixed in some of their ballet movements too. And very soon, the dragon and the porcupines had made up a completely new dance. Disco showed the porcupines how to do the conga, which they absolutely loved. When the dancing was over, the porcupines thanked Disco for spending some time with them and said if he wanted to meet other dancing animals, he should find the pink flamingos down by the riverbank. They showed him which way to go and then said goodbye to the dancing dragon. Disco headed to the riverbank, practicing some of his new ballet moves along the way. He soon came to a group of bright pink flamingos who were standing along the riverbank. Disco was amazed to see that they were all balancing on one leg. The flamingos looked like they were waiting for something to happen. Disco waited too. And then something did happen. A turtle shuffled through the forest with a violin in her hands. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "I slept in. I just couldn't get out of my comfy shell this morning." She moved over to the waiting flamingos, sat down, and tucked the violin under her chin. She began to play a beautiful song. The sound of it caused the flamingos to start dancing along the riverbank in long, graceful strides with their heads held high. They strutted to the left, clicked their fingers 3 times, and then strutted to the right, before twirling around and starting their movements all over again. Disco's feet tapped to the rhythm of the turtle's tune. One of the flamingos noticed Disco and waved him over. He made room for the dragon and showed him how to strut in time with the others. It didn't take long for Disco to pick up the movements, and he enjoyed moving back and forth with the brightly coloured birds. He particularly liked the twirling around parts, and couldn't help adding an extra twirl and a double whirl sometimes. He added a couple of bops too. The flamingos noticed his moves and copied him, and soon a new dance was created. Disco stayed with the flamingos for a while and learned more of their dances, and in return he showed them some of the new ones he'd learned that day. He wasn't surprised to find out they loved doing the conga. After a while, the dancing came to an end, and the flamingos said they had to fly, but told Disco that if he wanted to continue dancing, he should head deeper into the forest, where he would find lots of animals who loved to dance. The little dragon thanked them and watched the pink birds as they flew away over the trees. He walked further into the forest until he heard the sound of music coming from somewhere. He followed the melody and arrived at a clearing where a trio of gorillas were playing guitars. Other gorillas were dancing in pairs and moving smoothly back and forth across the grass. Now and again, one of the dancing gorillas would spin around and dip to the ground whilst holding hands with their partner. The music was joyful, and Disco found himself bopping from side to side. The gorillas saw him and invited him to join them. Disco partnered up with a gorilla who was about his size, and soon the pair were waltzing around the ground as elegantly as the others. Disco couldn't help adding his own touches, with a spin here and a kicking leg there. His moves impressed the gorillas, and they did the same as the little dragon. And it wasn't long before the gorillas and the dragon were moving to a new dance. Disco stayed with the grooving gorillas a while longer, and even learned how to strum the guitar. Everyone was being so kind to him. He carried on through Sleepy Forest, on the lookout for more dancing animals. Disco soon came across a couple of red-furred foxes who taught him how to foxtrot through the blackberry bushes. Then he met a kind-faced panda who showed him how to perform a slow shuffle beneath the shady boughs of an old oak tree. Later on, he joined a dozen stripy tigers as they performed a tango across a wooden bridge, their tiger feet and dragon feet tapping a beat on the wood. Some time later, Disco took a rest at the side of a river and gazed in wonder as a group of smiling otters performed a synchronized swimming dance through the water. They asked Disco to join them, but he didn't like the idea of getting his feet wet. So he stood up and copied their movements on the dry land instead. The day wore on, and Disco carried on dancing with different animals. He boogied with badgers outside their burrows. He sambered with squirrels as they danced around a large tree. He met an elderly monkey who did a mamba whilst playing the mandolin. And he had a fabulous time dancing with some cheerful chipmunks who hopped and bopped through the forest. Disco had a wonderful time learning lots of new dance moves, and an even better time making new friends along the way. Most of all, Disco thought that making up new dances with the other animals was the best fun of all. The sun made its slow journey across the sky and headed towards the horizon. The first star of the night twinkled into view. The little dragon began to feel tired, and he couldn't stop himself from yawning. It was time for him to go home. He opened his wings and flew into the sky. But even though he was tired, his dragon feet still jigged a little jig as the memory of the day's dances lingered in his mind. As Disco flew through the darkening sky, he thought about the animals he'd met and all the dancing they'd done together. He'd had an amazing time and couldn't wait to do it all again. His mother and father were waiting for him on the mountain top. They hugged him and asked him about his day. The little dragon still had a small amount of energy left, so he showed his parents some of his new moves. More stars appeared, and a full moon shone down on the little dancing dragon. Disco was lost in the magic of his dancing and closed his eyes. He listened to the sounds of the night. Hoots came from treetop owls. A nightingale sang sweetly. The soft calls of good night echoed through the forest on the evening breeze. Disco felt the rhythm of the night surrounding him, like a soothing lullaby of relaxing sounds. He swayed gently from side to side. So lost was he in his nighttime dance that Disco didn't notice that all the other dragons on the mountain had silently gathered around him. They saw how slowly he was dancing and how his wings gently opened and closed as though he was flying. The dragons began to copy his soothing dance, and they softly swayed to the melody of the evening too. They smiled gently at each other. This was a dance they could all do easily. Still with his eyes closed, Disco yawned and yawned again. His feet finally came to a stop. Mother Dragon scooped her son into her arms and took him into their cozy cave. She placed him in his bed and tucked a warm cover around him. She kissed him good night. She returned to the dragons and joined them as they danced their special nighttime dance. Very soon, and one by one, the dragons remembered how to dance. The moon shone down brightly on the dancing dragons as they discoed merrily through the night.
This is Betty Badger's Bakery by Alicia Ainsley. Betty Badger's alarm clock gently chimed and she stirred, rolling over in bed to turn it off. She sleepily opened up her heavy eyes to check the time. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Perfect. 2 o'clock in the morning wasn't an unusual time for Betty Badger to be waking up, for you see badgers are nocturnal animals, which means they mainly come out at night. And being nocturnal was perfect for Betty Badger, as it meant that she had plenty of time during the night to prepare everything for when her shop opened in the morning. Betty Badger owned the most popular bakery in the whole of Sleepy Forest. Animals and magical creatures from all over journeyed to Betty Badger's bakery with the intention of buying a delicious baked good or two. She had built up a stellar reputation with her delicious creations, and there was always a long queue already waiting outside her bakery door when she flipped over the closed sign to open. Betty worked all the way through the night, baking up a vast variety of sweet treats, fresh pastries, and loaves of bread to delight her customers with. With so many eager customers coming through her bakery door every day, Betty needed to whip up a huge selection of delicious treats. Luckily, Betty had a few eager helpers that assisted her in the kitchen to get everything ready. They were her children, Ginger, Chip, and Lavender. Betty's 3 little badgers adored helping out their mother in the kitchen, and they were quite the little bakers themselves. Ever since they had been just teeny, tiny badger cubs, Ginger, Chip, and Lavender had shown an interest in baking. Watching their mother work so hard every day and enjoying the delectable treats she produced, they had always wanted to learn how to do what she did. So, as soon as they were big enough, Betty began teaching them how to bake too. With the help of her 3 little badgers, Betty was able to make dozens of batches of cookies, cakes, breads, pastries, pies, and donuts each night. Betty liked to say that the food in her bakery tasted so good because it was made with love, teamwork, and a sprinkle of family magic. So, as soon as her alarm went off at 2 o'clock in the morning, Betty rolled out of bed and prepared to get to work. She brushed her hair and wrapped her yellow pinafore around her waist, and then headed over to her children's room to wake them up. Ginger, Chip, and Lavender all slept in the same bedroom in their own little beds side by side. Their bed covers all had pictures of cupcakes on, and they each had a woven dream catcher hanging above their beds. Betty wondered what wonderful dreams the dream catchers had managed to catch that night. Betty gently nudged each of her children in their peaceful beds and whispered, "Wakey, wakey, rise and shine, my little muffins." Ginger and Chip began to stir and stretched their fuzzy little arms above their heads, preparing for the day ahead. But Lavender buried her head beneath her pillow instead. She whimpered, "I'm tired. I don't want to get up." Betty stood back and giggled at her sleepy daughter. "Oh, that's a shame," said Betty with a smile. "I was going to let you ice the sponge cake today. But if you'd rather stay in bed, I'll just do it myself." All of a sudden, Lavender pulled the pillow back away from her head and she shot up out of bed. Lavender loved icing cakes. She adored squeezing the piping bag and designing her own swirls and patterns with the icing. Betty knew that this promise would be enough to get her daughter out of bed. The 3 little badgers all brushed their hair and put on their aprons. Ginger wore a sky blue apron, Chip wore a soft green, and Lavender wore a light purple one. Then they all headed to the kitchen that backed onto Betty's bakery. Betty's bakery kitchen was huge. It was the biggest room in their house to accommodate all of the work that went on in it. There was a wall of ovens and a large kitchen island to work at, cupboards upon cupboards full of baking trays and mixing bowls, and several drawers full of utensils like spatulas, whisks, and rolling pins. The walls were painted a soft yellow, Betty's favourite colour, and all of the cupboards were creamy white. A large blackboard was hung up on the main kitchen wall, and on it, scribbled in chalk, was today's bakery menu. The three little badgers stood beneath the chalkboard and read the menu. This morning, on top of their usual bakes, they needed to make 6 loaves of bread, 2 dozen raspberry and white chocolate cupcakes, 1 dozen seeded bagels, and a big cream cake. Ginger, Chip, and Lavender all began to buzz with excitement, and they turned to their mother for instruction. "What shall we make first?" cried Chip with anticipation. Betty looked at her 3 eager children, then at the board, and contemplated. Betty decided. "Ginger, how about you get started mixing the ingredients for the bread dough? Chip, you can start on the sponge mix, and Lavender, you can grab the seeds for the bagels. I'll begin whipping up the bagel mixture." The 3 little badgers all nodded obediently and wandered off to get to work. They all washed their hands with soap at the wash basins and then headed to their respective baking stations, ready to get their paws stuck in. On the way to her station, Lavender paused and asked her mother, "I do still get to ice the cake today, right?" Betty chuckled and assured her daughter that she would indeed get to ice the cake, as promised. "Can I sprinkle the seeds on the bagels?" called out Ginger. "Can I dust the cupcakes?" piped up Chip. Betty reassured all of her children that they would all get a chance to do the fun decorating tasks too. But first, they needed to make the basis of all the food. Ginger picked a large mixing bowl out of one of the cupboards and placed it on the worktop. Then he began to collect all of the ingredients he would need for the bread dough. He needed a bag of flour, some salt and yeast, and a jug of water. The ingredients for bread are surprisingly minimal. Betty always said that it's the kneading and baking process that makes her bread extra special. Betty often liked to add surprise flavours to her loaves of bread using herbs such as rosemary, thyme, and basil. Plus, her cheesy garlic bread was a big hit whenever she made it. Perhaps today she would make a selection of different flavours for her customers to choose from. While Ginger combined his ingredients in a mixing bowl, Chip collected his ingredients for the sponge mix. The sponge mix would be used for both the cupcakes and the cream cake, so he needed to make a lot of it. He, too, needed flour, but he also required sugar, eggs, butter, baking powder, and milk. Cake mix was much more complex than bread dough, and it could often get messy. Luckily, Chip loved getting messy. Chip got stuck into combining his cake mix, while Betty made her bagel dough on the other side of the kitchen counter. Betty had been baking for so many years that she was much quicker than her young children. However, she couldn't do it all alone. Her bakery had become too popular. She was grateful for her children's help in the kitchen. As she watched her 2 sons crack eggs, sprinkle salt, and weigh out the flour, she beamed with pride. Just as Betty was finishing up her bagel dough, Lavender appeared by her side with a basket full of seeds. "Here you go, Mama," Lavender said proudly, placing the basket down on the worktop. "The squirrels got a good mixture of seeds for us today. There are poppy seeds and sesame seeds, plus a few caraway seeds." Betty smiled gratefully and replied, "Those all sound delicious. They will be perfect on our bagels." Betty placed the basket of seeds to the side, next to the bagel dough, and walked around to inspect Ginger and Chip's mixing bowls. Ginger's bread dough was perfectly gooey, and he was in the process of rolling it up into a big ball when Betty walked over. He sprinkled some flour on the kitchen surface and tipped the ball of dough out onto the worktop. It was time to knead the dough. Ginger pushed his palms into the ball of dough, creating a big dip in the center with a satisfying squish. Then he picked up the edge of the dough and folded on top before repeating the motion. Kneading the dough was important to ensure that lots of air bubbles worked their way into the dough. Without lots of air bubbles inside, the dough wouldn't inflate during baking, so it was an important process. Ginger loved kneading dough. It felt like Play-Doh in his hands, and he delighted in the motion of squishing and folding, squishing and folding, over and over again, until it was just right. When Ginger believed the dough to be ready, he rolled it up into a big ball, placed it back inside the mixing bowl, and covered it with film. "I've made the bread dough," declared Ginger, and Betty patted him on the back. Now the dough would need to be left to rise for an hour or so before they could tear it up into smaller chunks to make loaves of bread. Baking was all about patience. The bread dough and the bagel dough would need to be left alone to rise for a while before they could be baked and finished. So, in the meantime, the badgers could all focus on making the cakes. Chip's cake batter was ready to go, and so the other badgers set about preparing the next steps. Lavender took a couple of cupcake trays out of the cupboard and placed them on the worktop. Then she placed a wrapper in each cake tin. Ginger grabbed 2 large cake tins from another cupboard and lined them with baking paper, while Betty collected the white chocolate chips and raspberry pieces. Betty assisted Chip in pouring out some of the cake batter into the 2 lined cake tins that would be used to make the cream cake, ensuring none got spilt or wasted. Then, when those tins were full, she began to add the white chocolate chips and raspberry pieces to the remaining batter in the bowl. She gave it all a good mix-up with a wooden spoon, sloshing the mixture around the bowl with expertise, and then they all set to work dividing the remaining batter between the cupcake wrappers. Ginger, Chip, and Lavender each used a big tablespoon to scoop out the white chocolate and raspberry mixture from the bowl and dollop it into each cake wrapper until there was nothing left. When the mixing bowl was empty and the cake tins were all filled, Betty looked at her 3 little badgers, who all had mischievous grins on their faces. She paused, smiled, and laughed. "All right, then, you can now lick the spoons." Right on cue, Ginger, Chip, and Lavender all excitedly cheered and licked the leftover batter off their wooden spoons, giggling with glee as they did. They loved making cakes together purely for this reason. The sweet, sticky batter was delicious, and they licked up every last bit off their spoons. Betty switched on the ovens and lined up the cake tins ready to go inside. Betty always handled the ovens whilst the kids cleaned down their baking stations to prepare for the next steps of their morning baking. Once the cakes were in the oven, they all washed up the bowls and spoons and wiped down the kitchen worktop together. Lavender put extra bubbles into the washing up bowl and had lots of fun playing with them while she cleaned. She scooped up a big handful of white bubbles and spread them across her chin. She turned around to her brothers and declared, "Hey, look! I've got a beard!" Ginger and Chip started to giggle deliriously and wanted to have a go too. Chip picked up some bubbles and placed them on his head. "Look, I have a hat," he announced, and they all laughed. Then Ginger gathered up some bubbles in his hands and blew them everywhere, announcing that he had created magic. The three little badgers all laughed hysterically at their mischievousness, and Betty watched on from the other side of the kitchen with a smirk. Meanwhile, Betty divided up the bagel dough into round pieces, poked a hole in each, and put them in a big pan to boil while she set to work on the loaves of bread. When the bagels were ready, she placed them on a baking tray and called out to her children, "If you want to sprinkle the seeds on top, then you'll need to dry your hands and clean up those bubbles on the floor." The three little badgers did as they were told and raced over to the bagels to finish them off together. Lavender brushed egg yolk over the tops of them, and Ginger and Chip sprinkled the seed mix from the basket over the top to finish the bagels. Betty placed them all on a baking tray, lit up another oven, and placed them inside. Lastly, Betty added a few finishing touches to the loaves of bread, sprinkling herbs and cheese over the tops of their doughy creations, and then placed them in a separate oven. Betty instructed each of her children to watch over the varying baked items through the oven doors to ensure none of them burnt. Ginger was in charge of the bread, Chip in charge of the cakes, and Lavender was in charge of the bagels. While her children carefully watched over the differing cakes and breads in the oven, Betty whipped up a bowl of icing and filled up a piping bag with frosting. She checked the clock on the wall. It read 5 o'clock. They had just enough time to allow the cakes to cool and decorate them ready for the shop opening. As soon as the cakes and loaves of bread had baked to perfection, Betty lifted out each tray with a pair of oven gloves and placed them on the cooling racks. Chip gazed at the sweet-smelling cupcakes adoringly and sniffed the air with longing. But Betty reminded him, "Don't you go taking one. They will all be very hot, fresh from the oven. We need to let them cool down." While their baked goods cooled, the whole family set to work dusting, sweeping, and wiping down Betty's bakery. The quaint little shop was only small, so it was easy to clean, and they had it finished in next to no time. Betty gazed around her precious shop with pride. She couldn't wait for her customers to see what they'd been baking all through the night. Returning to the kitchen, the air was filled with the mouth-watering scent of freshly baked bread. Instinctively, Betty, Ginger, Chip, and Lavender's bellies all rumbled with desire. But these loaves of bread weren't for them. They were for Betty's customers, and they still had a lot to accomplish before the bakery opened. Once the cakes had all cooled down, Ginger, Chip, and Lavender picked the cupcakes out of the trays by their wrappers and placed them on the worktop to be iced. At the same time, Betty carefully extracted the 2 round slabs of sponge cake from their tins and placed them down to be iced. Lavender rushed to her mother's side enthusiastically and whispered, "Remember, you said I get to ice the cake today." Betty passed a spatula to Lavender and replied, "Yes, I did. Let's get to work then." Whilst Ginger and Chip worked together to ice the cupcakes, Betty and Lavender coated the top of one of the large sponges with buttercream and strawberry jam, and then they placed the other circle of sponge on top. Next, they set to work spreading white icing all over the top and sides of the 2-tiered cream cake. They delicately slathered the icing on with gentle motions of their spatulas and ensured that no spot of sponge was uncovered. To finish off their creamy creation, Betty helped Lavender decorate the top of the cake with perfect, pretty patterns using a piping bag. They held the bag together and twisted and squeezed it to splurge frosting shapes around the top edges of the cream cake. When it was finally finished, it looked like a work of art. Ginger and Chip were equally as proud of their cupcake creations. They added the finishing touch to their frosted cupcakes by tapping multicolored sprinkles onto them, and stood back to admire their handiwork, giving each other a high five. Betty observed all of the beautiful baked delights they'd made as a team this morning and clapped her hands together with delight. "Well done, my little badgers," she cried. "We did it, yet again. The customers are going to love what we have made for them today." They all carried out the loaves of bread, bagels, cupcakes, and the big cream cake together into the bakery, stocked the shelves, and filled the cabinet. Gazing at all of the various delicious baked items in the shop cabinet, Betty smiled and said, "I think we worked so hard tonight that we should enjoy a little of this for ourselves." Betty took one loaf of bread off the shelf and then turned to her 3 little helpers. She gestured to the pretty iced cupcakes and whispered, "Go on, you can each have one for your hard work." Ginger, Chip, and Lavender all leapt for joy and picked a cupcake each from the shop cabinet. They didn't waste any time getting stuck into them and gobbled them up within seconds. As always, they were absolutely delicious. The 3 little badgers licked their fingers clean and thanked their mother. "Right," Betty announced, clapping her paws together. "Let's open up." Lavender opened up the rolling blind that covered the large front window to the bakery and gasped as the sunlight streamed in, lighting up the room. Already there were animals queuing up outside the bakery door, waiting to come inside. "Wow, Mama," Lavender exclaimed. "You have lots of customers already." Ginger responded, "That's because Mama is the best baker in Sleepy Forest." Betty smiled proudly and added, "We all are the best bakers in Sleepy Forest. I couldn't do it without your help." Betty gave her children a big hug and then walked over to the shop door. She unlatched the lock and turned the sign hanging on the door to open. She glanced over her shoulder back at her little badgers and whispered, "You all go have fun now. I will take it from here." With that, Ginger, Chip, and Lavender walked back into their house to enjoy the rest of the morning before having a much-needed rest. And Betty opened the door to her bakery and greeted her first customers of the day. "Welcome to Betty Badger's Bakery," she announced to her customers. The customers all stepped inside and browsed the scrumptious treats on display with a collection of audible gasps, oohs, and ahs. Betty stepped behind the counter, cleaned a smudge of icing sugar off her pinafore, and smiled as she asked her first customer, "So, what would you like today?" Tonight's bedtime story is The Yeti Who Sold Spaghetti by Alicia Ainsley. One evening, Littlefoot the Yeti received some most surprising news. He found out that his favourite shop in the whole wide world, Auntie Antler's Alpine Emporium, was closing down. Auntie Antler was an elderly reindeer who'd lived on the same snowy mountain range as Littlefoot for as long as he could remember. Eons ago, when he was but a young Yeti, his parents would take him to Auntie Antler's Arctic Emporium, where he would browse the shelves for all kinds of delicious treats, like snow rolls and Yule logs and baked Alaska puddings. Then he would take a seat at one of the tables alongside his parents, and Auntie Antler would bring out a tray balanced on her antlers with 3 steaming bowls of her signature homemade mountain vegetable soup. Every now and then, Littlefoot would ask Auntie Antler if one day she could make him spaghetti, for spaghetti was Littlefoot's favourite food. But Auntie Antler would just chuckle and say, "I've got no knack for making spaghetti, I'm afraid, Littlefoot. You'll have to have your spaghetti elsewhere." Littlefoot wouldn't mind, because even though it was true spaghetti was his favourite food, Auntie Antler's mountain vegetable soup was still absolutely delicious, and he licked his bowl clean every single time. In fact, Littlefoot loved Auntie Antler and her mountain veg soup so much that even all these years later, he still came by the Emporium almost every day to see her and have a bowl. And it was on one such evening that Auntie Antler told him the news. In just a few days, the Emporium would be closing its doors. It was shutting down. Littlefoot's mouth fell open in shock. Unfortunately, he was halfway through eating his mountain vegetable soup, so a piece of carrot popped out of his mouth and plopped onto the table. "But why?" he asked. Auntie Antler sighed. "Do you know how long I've been doing this, Littlefoot?" 100 years?" he asked. "Not quite," Auntie Antler said, "but close. The truth is, I'm getting too old to run an emporium and be stuck in the kitchen all the time. I've loved it. I've had a full house every night for as long as I can remember. And I've been featured 3 times, yes, 3 times, in Mr. Tusk's list of best mountainside meals. But, Littlefoot, I'm ready to retire. I want to have more time for doing things that reindeer like me want to do, like skiing and watching documentaries about Lapland. The era of the Alpine Emporium has been wonderful, but even the most wonderful eras got to come to an end sometime." Though Littlefoot nodded because he understood, he still looked down sadly into his soup. "I'll be sad not to have your delicious food any more," he said. "Don't worry, Littlefoot," said Auntie Antler. You can still swing by my house from time to time, and I'll make a special bowl just for you." Littlefoot gave her a smile. That made him feel better. He perked up a jot. "And what will happen to this place?" he asked, looking around at the building's wooden walls and rafters. "Is someone going to take it over?" "Well, I hadn't quite got that far," Auntie Antler told him. "But I do have one idea, though it might be a pretty crazy one." "Oh, yes?" Littlefoot asked. "What's that?" "I've been thinking about how you always wished I would serve spaghetti in here," Auntie Antler said. "I remember you would so often say that there was nowhere, anywhere on the mountain range that could do a good bowl of spaghetti." "Well, that's true," said Littlefoot. "But what does that have to do with anything?" "I thought perhaps someone could turn the Emporium into a spaghetti place," Auntie Antler said. "That's a nice idea," said Littlefoot. "But who could do that?" "Why, you silly sausage," Auntie Antler said. "You, of course." Littlefoot blinked at her. "Me?" he asked. "Yes, you." Auntie Antler gave him a long look, with her bushy reindeer eyebrows raised. "Just think about it," she said. "Now, think about it." So he did. He looked around the Emporium, at its rows of shelves, its counter and bar, its kitchen in the back. The tables and chairs, the walls covered in pictures of all kinds of snowy mountain creatures eating Auntie Antler's soup, the creaky, beloved floorboards with the soft and cozy rugs. He thought about it. And the more he thought about it, the more he liked it. A spaghetti shop. Well, yes, wouldn't that be a fine thing? And not just any spaghetti shop. His spaghetti shop. Yeti Spaghetti. Littlefoot broke into a big smile and put a furry white hand on Auntie Antler's shoulders. "I'll do it," he said. As it turned out, there was much to prepare for opening a spaghetti shop in the mountains. Even though the log cabin of the Alpine Emporium was weather-tight and sturdy, it still required a lick of paint and a few decorations. Littlefoot, after all, wanted to put his own stamp on it. So he got out a paintbrush. A rich olive green would be best, he had decided, and set to work. And when the place was spruced up, he hung pictures of bowls of pasta on the walls and fashioned a couple of life-sized Yetis, wearing chef's hats, of course, out of dried spaghetti, to act as welcoming statues by the door. And last but not least, he built a sign, climbed a ladder to hang the sign above the door of the log cabin that read, "Yeti Spaghetti," in bright golden lights. You'd be able to spot it from way down the snow-lined street. It would draw people in from far and wide. Luckily, the waiters and kitchen helpers who worked with Auntie Antler wanted to stay on, so Littlefoot didn't have to find new staff. But what he did have to do was induct them all into the fine arts of making spaghetti. They were very skilled cooks who had refined and perfected a whole suite of dishes that appeared on Auntie Antler's menu. But, as you well know, they had never cooked spaghetti. And at Littlefoot's Yeti Spaghetti, they weren't simply going to be cooking spaghetti, they were going to be making it. So Littlefoot put on his white chef's hat and showed them how to mix the eggs and the flour, and then kneaded it together until it produced a dough of just the right consistency. A balancing act as tricky and particular as a circus performer treading a thread-thin high wire. Then he taught them how to take a rolling pin and roll out the dough until it was a long, thin sheet, and slice it into perfect strands of spaghetti as slender as angel's hair. Then into the bubbling water they went, swimming around for just a few minutes until they were cooked perfectly through. "And you see," he said to his sous chefs, presenting them with a bowl of steaming pasta, "this is how you make a perfect bowl of spaghetti." And then, of course, the sauce. Or rather sauces. Cheese sauces and bolognese sauces, vegetable sauces and sauces with secret recipes that only a select few would ever know. And of course, Littlefoot's special creation, of which he was particularly proud. Have you ever heard of a spaghetti dessert? Well, at Yeti Spaghetti, they would revolutionize pasta forever with the hazelnut chocolate spaghetti, lip-smackingly good. "Are you sure you're going to be able to get this all together in time for opening night, Littlefoot?" Auntie Antler asked, scrutinizing the long list of dishes the Yeti had written out on his chalkboard menu. Clearly, she thought it was ambitious. Littlefoot crossed his fingers, and his toes too, for good measure. "I hope so," he said. But he needn't have worried. Opening night went off swimmingly. Yeti Spaghetti was filled with guests who'd arrived from every neighbouring mountain peak. Candles flickered on tables, an Arctic monkey played guitar perched on a stool, and bowl after bowl of perfectly cooked spaghetti made its way from the kitchen to plates, and every bowl was wiped clean. "Well," Auntie Antler said when the evening was over, "I think that was a roaring success." "Me too," said Littlefoot. Our Yeti friend was exhausted. He'd been on his feet for hours, welcoming diners, smoothing out issues, delivering dishes to tables. But he had an irrepressible smile on his face. What a night it had been. "Oh," Auntie Antler exclaimed. "What's that?" A white envelope had just been slipped through the letterbox and was now resting on the welcome mat that lay before the door. Auntie Antler trotted over and lifted it up. "Oh my," she said. "I know what this is. I remember when I got my letter through the post." Littlefoot looked at her with his bushy white eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" he asked her. "What is it?" For an answer, Auntie Antler opened the letter and read it out. "Dear Littlefoot, it has come to my attention that you have lately opened a spaghetti shop to roaring acclaim. As a consequence, and to test the place for myself, I shall be attending Yeti Spaghetti tomorrow evening. If I am impressed by your offerings, you shall make it onto my list of best mountainside meals. But if I am unimpressed, then it will be a different matter entirely. I look forward to my visit. Until tomorrow, Mr. Tusk Tusk." Littlefoot's eyes widened with surprise and the slightest bit of trepidation. "Mr. Tusk Tusk?" he asked. "As in Mr. Tusk Tusk, the most important restaurant reviewer in the whole of the Sleepy Mountains?" Auntie Antler nodded. "And he wants to come here?" Littlefoot asked. "Tomorrow?" Auntie Antler nodded once again. Littlefoot gulped. Littlefoot wasn't entirely correct. Mr. Tusk was not merely the most important restaurant reviewer in the whole of the Sleepy Mountains. He was arguably the most important restaurant reviewer in the whole of the Northern Hemisphere. He was a big walrus of a ripe and seasoned age who'd made a name for himself over the years with his list of best mountainside meals, the definitive list of which eateries you simply had to go to, and which ones you simply had to avoid. No one knew if he was called Mr. Tusk because of his 2 massive tusks. If he'd only had one, some people said, he'd have just been called Mr. Tusk. Or if he was called that because that was the sound he made, tsk, tsk, when he was unimpressed with a dish set before him. He wore a top hat and a single monocle that made one of his eyes look supersize, and restaurateurs everywhere loved and feared him in equal measure. He could make a new restaurant sink or swim, which meant that Littlefoot had to make sure everything in Yeti Spaghetti was absolutely perfect. He couldn't have a single spoon out of place. He had expected the day to go terribly slowly, as things often did when you were eagerly anticipating something. Just like when each day leading up to your birthday or Christmas seems to take a year to pass by. But, in fact, the day went rather quickly for Littlefoot. He supposed that was because he was kept very busy. He scrubbed the surfaces, he dusted the lamps. He went down to the tundra to pick alpine flowers, which he then placed in vases on all of the tables. He made sure that everything in the kitchen was in order. He gave his staff a much-needed pep talk. And then the evening snuck up on him. One moment, Littlefoot felt the sun was shining, low in the sky, spilling yellow light over the snow and making every minuscule crystal glisten. And the next moment, the sun had gone. The air was dark and crisp, and the sky was a black blanket studded with twinkling stars. Guests were coming in through the door, taking their seats, lending their voices to the happy hubbub of chit-chat. How relieved Littlefoot was to see that Yeti Spaghetti was busy that evening. There was nothing worse for a food critic, he thought, than an empty restaurant. Then there came a knock at the door, and somehow Littlefoot just knew, perhaps from the ominous, booming nature of the knock, perhaps from the way that Auntie Antler glanced at him from across the room. He just knew. He opened the door, and there stood the walrus, his proud tusks freshly polished, his shirt and suit jacket finely pressed. "Why, good evening, Mr. Tusk," Littlefoot said. "Welcome to Yeti Spaghetti. It's such an honor to have you here." Mr. Tusk eyed Littlefoot through his monocle. "And you are the proprietor?" he asked. Littlefoot blinked at him for a moment. Yes, sir. If by that you mean, am I the Yeti who runs Yeti Spaghetti? Why, yes, I am. Littlefoot's the name." Mr. Tusk nodded. "Very good. Well, I have heard very good things about this place on the grapevine. I hope I shall not be disappointed." Littlefoot led Mr. Tusk to his table. It was the best table in the house. It stood the perfect distance from the guitar-playing Arctic monkey, in a position where the moonlight fell directly through one of the windows. It was altogether a magical spot, and Littlefoot felt a small wash of satisfaction at the look on Mr. Tusk's face. He was, at least, impressed with the vibes. Littlefoot handed Mr. Tusk the menu. "As you may have expected from the name," he said, "we only serve spaghetti here. But let me tell you, sir, the things you can do with spaghetti are almost unlimited." Mr. Tusk nodded and perused the menu before handing it back to Littlefoot. "I shall have the Yeti Sunsetty Spaghetti." "Oh, the sunsetty spaghetti. That's a very good choice, Mr. Tusk," said Littlefoot. He gave a little bow and took the order to the kitchen. "Start chopping those tomatoes in half," he told his team. "I want each and every one of them looking like the sun dipping down below the horizon." And as his team got preparing the veg, Littlefoot undertook the spaghetti himself. With a guest as important as Mr. Tusk, only the most expert spaghetti maker would suffice. He mixed the ingredients, rolled the dough, cut the finest slivers of pasta, and flashed them in a pan of water. 10 minutes later, Littlefoot himself was carrying the plate of pasta to Mr. Tusk. The walrus inhaled the rich smells rising from the plate. "Smells very good," he said. "Now let's see how it tastes." Littlefoot watched nervously from the corner, with Auntie Antler patting his shoulder with a hoof, as Mr. Tusk slowly and then more quickly gobbled down the sunsetty spaghetti. Soon enough, his plate was sparkling clean, as though there had never been any food there in the first place. "And how was that, sir?" Littlefoot asked, reappearing at Mr. Tusk's table. The walrus just gave a small nod. Clearly he was not willing to give anything away, and told Littlefoot it was time for him to take a look at the dessert menu. "Of course, sir," he said, handing the walrus the dessert menu and beginning to clear the table, when Mr. Tusk let out an exclamation of surprise and disgust. "Hazelnut chocolatey spaghetti," he spluttered. "Ah, yes," said Littlefoot. "I know it sounds rather peculiar." "Peculiar is one way of putting it," Mr. Tusk interjected. "But I assure you," Littlefoot went on, "it is quite a wonderful surprise." The walrus sighed. "I'm not convinced by that, but I suppose I shall have to try it." "Certainly," Littlefoot said, and he managed to keep his cool until he was safely back inside the kitchen, where he felt a little wobble go through him. "Oh dear," he thought. He hoped the hazelnut chocolate spaghetti wouldn't ruin Mr. Tusk's experience. And so it was with some trepidation that Littlefoot carried the plate of chocolatey spaghetti to the table, placed it in front of Mr. Tusk, and backed away. He watched as the food critic frowned, glaring down at the bowl, and lowered his face to give it a sniff. He grimaced. Then, picking up his fork, he nudged the pasta around, as though reluctant to even take a bit. He wound a few strands of pasta around the fork, and, hazelnut chocolate sauce dripping off the pale strands, he ferried a small bite to his mouth. He frowned. He chewed. And then the most wondrous thing happened. A smile like the sun rising dawned over Mr. Tusk's face. He looked down at his plate in surprise, and without wasting another moment, he tucked into the chocolate pasta. "Many thanks, Littlefoot," Mr. Tusk said 15 minutes later, as he pulled his jacket back on and made his way to the door. "You will hear of my review soon." When he was gone, Littlefoot slumped to the floor. He was exhausted. All the guests were gone. The restaurant was tidied up, and he was alone in Yeti Spaghetti with Auntie Antler. "You must be starving," she said to him. "It's been a long day of hard work. You need a bowl of spaghetti yourself." But Littlefoot only shook his head. "For the first time in my life," he said, "spaghetti is exactly what I don't want." "Well," asked Auntie Antler, "what would you like?" He gave her a soft look. "What I really want," he said, "is a bowl of your mountain veg soup." Auntie Antler gave him a warm, loving smile and trotted off into the kitchen. Not long later, she returned with a bowl of her hot, delicious soup, which Littlefoot sipped at gratefully. There they sat, chatting quietly as Littlefoot ate his soup, when something rather unexpected happened. A white, enveloped letter slipped once again through the door and fell to the mat. Auntie Antler and Littlefoot exchanged a wide-eyed stare, and she trotted over to pick it up. "Should I open it?" she asked. Littlefoot stared at her a few moments longer, deliberating. If this was what he thought it was, did he really want to know now, or should he save it for tomorrow? "Yes," he said, "we can't wait." Auntie Antler opened the letter and read, "Dear Littlefoot, I wanted to let you know straight away about my experience at your newly opened Yeti Spaghetti. What an interesting restaurant you opened. Altogether very strange, but undeniably lip-smackingly delicious. And, if I may say so myself, I have never eaten a dessert quite so unexpectedly brilliant as your hazelnut chocolate spaghetti. Even writing that feels odd to me, but there you have it. And so it is with much delight that I can tell you you have made it to the top of my list of best mountainside meals. Congratulations and thank you, Mr. Tusk. Littlefoot could have melted from the sweep of relief and joy that went through him. Top of the list? He couldn't believe it. "Well done, Littlefoot," Auntie Antler was saying, wrapping her hooves around him in a big reindeer hug. "But I didn't doubt you for a moment." "Thank you, Auntie Antler," he said. "Thank you for everything." Auntie Antler smiled, kissed him on the forehead, and left. Moonlight filtered through the restaurant. Sleep weighing heavily on him, Littlefoot wandered through Yeti Spaghetti and into the kitchen, where a huge pan of unused spaghetti sat on the side. Well, there was no one here to eat it. What would Littlefoot do with all that spaghetti? And then the oddest, coziest thought occurred to him. How comfortable and inviting that spaghetti looked. he took the pan and tipped the spaghetti onto the floor so that it lay in a big pile. And then, just like that, he lay down on it. Oh, yes, he'd been absolutely right. It turned out that not only was spaghetti the most delicious of all foods, it was also the most comfortable of all beds. Why had he never thought to sleep on spaghetti before? He nestled down into the soft, starchy strands, and they seemed to move to accommodate him. Spaghetti for a mattress, spaghetti for a pillow, and spaghetti for a warm cover. What more could he hope for? Sinking down into his spaghetti bed, the memory of Mr. Tusk's review like a gentle stroke in his brain. Littlefoot closed his eyes, stretched his limbs, and yawned. And it wasn't long before Littlefoot, the Yeti who sold spaghetti, drifted off to sleep. Is the Cozy Baking Challenge by Alicia Ainsley. Betty Badger's Bakery was the most popular eating establishment in Sleepy Forest. The humble bakery was a firm favourite amongst the citizens of the forest, and every day there was a long queue waiting outside, longing to indulge in the sweet and savoury treats that Betty had whipped up in her kitchen that morning. Business was booming, and as a result, Betty was struggling to keep up with the number of baked goods she needed to produce each day. Betty had a strict rule in her bakery that everything was baked fresh that day. That was why everything tasted so good. She and her 3 little badgers, Chip, Ginger and Lavender, woke up early every morning to whisk, knead and bake dozens upon dozens of delicious treats to sell on the shop floor when it opened to customers. Betty absolutely loved her job. It had always been her dream to open her own bakery, and seeing how many Sleepy Forest residents loved her creations filled her heart with joy. That was why it disappointed her so much when she ran out of things to sell and had to turn customers away who had queued up too late in the day. If only she had another pair of hands to help her in the kitchen. Maybe then she would be better able to stay on top of orders. At the end of one particularly busy day in the bakery, Betty, Chip, Ginger and Lavender were all tidying up the shop floor when Betty confessed her feelings. She sighed. I think we may need another pair of helping hands around here. The bakery has become so popular we can hardly keep up. What do you think about hiring a new baker to join our team? Betty's 3 children agreed that it was a good idea. If somebody else joined the team, then they could keep the kitchen ticking over while the children and Betty worked the shop floor. Betty smiled, feeling encouraged, and mused, good. Now, the only problem is, how do we find someone who is a good enough baker? We could put up a poster in the shop window, Lavender offered as she wiped icing sugar from the cake cabinet, leaving it sparkling clean. Chip proposed, or you could ask a friend to help. Betty was grateful for Lavender and Chip's ideas, but she knew that they wouldn't necessarily find the best baker to join their team that way. Then Ginger had an out-of-the-box idea that piqued Betty's interest. What if You held a competition to find the best baker in the forest, Ginger suggested. The winner's prize could be, to work in our bakery. Oh, I like that idea, Lavender grinned enthusiastically. We can be the taste testers, added Chip with glistening eyes. Betty chuckled at her children's enthusiasm. It did sound like a good idea, and it would be lots of fun, too. Betty mulled the idea over, and after a few days, she decided she would do it. Betty Badger would host a bake-off competition in Sleepy Forest to find the perfect sous chef. Chip, Ginger and Lavender designed colourful posters to advertise the event, and Betty set the date. In 2 Sundays' time, the Sleepy Forest Bake-Off would commence. Anybody was welcome to enter by baking something and bringing it to the event. Tables would be set up right outside Betty Badger's bakery for competitors to showcase their submissions on, and a judging team would taste test each entry to pick a winner. The lucky victor would earn a prize job in Betty Badger's renowned bakery kitchen. Betty was a little nervous about hosting the competition. What if nobody wanted to enter? Or what if there was nobody quite good enough among the contestants? It was all a bit of a risk, but fortunately, it turned out Betty had nothing to worry about. When the big day of the bake-off came around, the forest area around Betty Badger's bakery was chock-a-block with eager contestants and excited observers. Betty's Sleepy Forest Bake-Off had attracted interest from far and wide. Creatures big and small, enchanted and ordinary, had been busy in their kitchens at home, creating edible delights they believed would help them win the contest. The tables were packed to the brim. There was barely a spare spot left as each dish was crammed on top. There were cakes and cookies, pies and pastries, breads and biscuits galore. The aroma in the air was wonderful as the sweet scents flooded the forest. The smells were so enticing that every onlooker's belly grumbled with longing. Luckily, the 3 little badgers had anticipated that an audience might need a snack and had prepared a fresh batch of mini donuts that morning in the kitchen to hand out to attendees. Whilst they did so, Betty overlooked the array of bake-off submissions. Everything looked wonderful. In front of every submission was a little paper tag stating the name of the contestant who had made it and the title they'd come up with for their dish. Betty and her children would taste the food first before looking at who had made it, to ensure their scores would be fair and unbiased. When it was finally time for the taste testing part of the bake-off to begin, Chip, Ginger and Lavender returned to their mother's side and grabbed their aprons, tasting spoons, clipboards and pens. The 3 little taste testers looked very official. Betty turned to the crowds of eager onlookers and excited contestants. She addressed them all. Thank you for coming today, and welcome to the Sleepy Forest Bake-Off. The audience clapped, and the 3 little badgers grinned and hopped up and down excitedly. As you know, Betty continued, today's competition is being held with a very important goal in mind. We are searching for the best baker in Sleepy Forest. Whoever wins today with the most delicious dish will earn a prized position in my bakery kitchen. The spectators instinctively oohed with intrigue, and the competitors ahed with excitement. Betty placed her tall white chef's hat on her head and declared, "Let the bake-off contest begin." The crowds cheered, and Betty and her little badgers turned to the tables of entries with their clipboards. It was time to do some taste testing. "Where shall we begin?" Chip asked, staring at the tables. "It all looks so good." "Obviously, it would make sense to start with the dish labelled number 1, Lavender replied, matter-of-factly. Ginger raised his tasting spoon in the air and pointed to a plate of spiral-shaped, multicoloured mini-cakes with sparkly sprinkles on the top. "There's number 1, he declared. Betty and her children passed around the creatively designed cakes and each took a bite. It was sugary sweet and evaporated like sherbet dust in their mouths. Interesting," Betty commented, smacking her tongue against her lips and writing a score on her clipboard. "What are they called?" Ginger inspected the tag and read that the cakes were called twirly-whirly buns. They had been baked by none other than Coco the koala. Betty smiled appreciatively and said, "We are off to a good start." The next entry was a plate of what looked like pancakes, suitably named Sweet and Sticky Stacks. 5 fluffy pancakes were stacked on top of each other in a perfect tower, and 2 different coloured sauces in gold and pink had been drizzled over the top. The sauces cascaded down the sides of the pancakes onto the plate. A selection of berries and honeycomb decorated the top layer, like a little crown on top of the dish. It all looked very impressive, although Betty wondered how something like this might be sold in her bakery without making quite a mess in the process. The family of taste testers all dug their spoons into the sweet and sticky stack and carved out a 5-layered bite. Ginger chewed and exclaimed, My bite tastes like mixed fruit." Chip replied, surprised, "Really? Mine tastes like cinnamon." Lavender surmised, "Mine tastes like both of those things. The different coloured drizzles are different flavours. Gold is cinnamon and the pink is berries." Betty was impressed by her children's observations. Lavender was right. The syrups tasted lovely on their own, but when blended together in a bite, they created a unique taste infusion. Betty liked the flavours of the syrups. However, the pancakes themselves didn't quite live up to her expectations. As fluffy as they looked, the pancakes were actually a little dry on the inside. "It's such a shame," Betty thought as she wrote down her score. "They have such potential. The recipe just needs a bit of tweaking." Betty checked the name on the tag. The sweet and sticky stack had been made by a young girl named Wizzly Witch. Betty made a mental note to give some advice to young Wizzly at a later date. She had good potential for someone so young. She just needed some more practice. Next, the family of judges turned to the third dish they had to taste test. The tag stated that it was a chocolate mud pie, and it looked like exactly that. Inside a big metal bowl, someone had cooked up a big batch of what looked like sludgy mud. It didn't look like the most appetizing of dishes, but Betty Badger hoped it would taste better than it looked. She and her 3 children dipped their tasting spoons into the chocolate mud pie and scooped out 4 dripping spoonfuls of the mixture. Bravely, they all licked the spoon. Betty politely swallowed the mud pie as her children tried to hide their expressions. She didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but it really was quite revolting. The very subtle hint of bitter chocolate was overwhelmed by the strong flavors of, you guessed it, earthy mud. Betty forced a polite smile and promptly drew a 0 on her clipboard. The chocolate mud pie had not quite hit the spot. Betty and her children made their way through the dishes on the table, taste-testing them all and scoring them fairly. The array of food was vast. Everything was completely different. They tasted Peanut the Armadillo's peanut butter shells and Mr. Moose's Black Forest Mousse, Camo the Chameleon's Rainbow Twizzlers, and Munchie the Raccoon's freshly baked pizza rolls. Eventually, Betty and her 3 little badgers came to something a lot simpler. It was a loaf of bread, although it wasn't just any loaf of bread. The golden, crusty loaf appeared to have dainty freckles of purple herbs embedded within it, and it smelt divine. Betty leaned closer and inhaled. It smelt of lavender, delicate, sweet lavender. Betty cut a slice of the lavender loaf and divided it between herself, Chip, Ginger, and Lavender. To her surprise, a thick, gooey, melted layer of cheese oozed out of the walls of baked bread dough. It had a secret filling, and it looked and smelt divine. The badgers all tucked in, and their eyes happily lit up in unison. The bread tasted good, very good. The crust was perfectly crispy and chewy, while the dough was so spongy and soft that it practically melted in their mouths, as well as the mild, nutty cheese. The taste of lavender was subtle, yet unmistakable, and Betty also detected hints of rosemary and thyme within the ingredients. The bread boasted unique flavors, and Betty thought that perhaps this was the most delicious bread she had ever tasted. Her little badgers seemed to agree, too. "I give this a 10 out of 10, declared Chip, writing a big 10 on his clipboard. "Me too. This is delicious stuff," Ginger agreed. "I never thought I would enjoy bread so much, but this is so nice. I could eat the whole loaf," admitted Lavender, before adding with a hint of mischief, "I also like that it is named after me." Betty chuckled and wrote her score on her clipboard in secret. She had to admit, this lavender loaf was the tastiest item she had eaten so far in the contest. Betty picked up the tag attached to the bread plate to see who had baked such a standout entry. But upon lifting it, she realized that there was no name written on the back. The lavender loaf had been submitted by an anonymous baker. "Whose entry is this lavender loaf?" Betty inquired, looking around at the crowd of curious contestants lingering nearby. Her question was initially met with silence. Nobody seemed to be coming forward to claim the lavender loaf as their own. Then, all of a sudden, she heard a couple of animals whispering and noticed shuffling in the crowd. A few animals were shepherding a hedgehog to the front of them. The hedgehog stepped forward with confusion, carrying fistfuls of complimentary mini donuts. "What's going on?" the hedgehog asked. Betty smiled and repeated, "I'm looking for the owner of this lavender loaf. There is no name attached to it. Does it belong to you?" The hedgehog giggled, a little embarrassed, and confessed, "Oh yes, sorry, that is mine. I must have forgotten to write my name on the tag. My name is Prickles." Betty smiled and nodded, squiggling the name Prickles onto the back of the tag with her pen. Prickles the hedgehog munched on his doughnuts and disappeared back into the crowd, trying not to draw any further attention to himself. Betty and her little badgers continued to judge the other entries in the bake-off as fairly as possible. But there was one particular dish that kept coming back to Betty's mind as the best she had tasted: the lavender loaf. Once they had sampled every delicious entry in the bake-off, Betty and her little badgers consulted their clipboards to work out who had received the most points. Several entries had scored highly, and so many had been delicious. If Betty could pick several winners, she would. However, the one entry that unsurprisingly came out top was Prickles the hedgehog's lavender loaf. The family of badgers all agreed that it was their favourite dish. Prickles was undoubtedly a skilled baker, worthy of working with them in the bakery. With their decision made, Betty stepped out in front of the gathered crowds to happily make her announcement. "Hello, everyone," she began. "Thank you to all who took the time to enter the bake-off today. There have been so many fantastic dishes that it has been hard to choose a winner. Nevertheless, we have chosen someone who got a fantastic score of 10 out of 10 across the board." The crowd began to mutter amongst themselves, impressed by this score. Betty announced, "Please put your hands, paws, claws and wings together for the winner of our Sleepy Forest Bake-Off. Prickles the hedgehog with his incredible lavender loaf." The crowd cheered and parted, revealing a shocked Prickles the hedgehog standing in the centre with another doughnut frozen in midair, halfway towards his mouth. The stunned hedgehog could barely move in surprise. He hadn't expected to win. Noticing that the hedgehog was a bit starstruck, the little badgers decided to help him out and rushed over to bring him forward. They dressed the hedgehog in a wooden crown and draped a golden banner across his spiky shoulders, crowning Prickles the winner of the bake-off. The crowds continued to applaud the successful baker, and Betty stepped up to shake Prickles' hand, finally snapping him out of his bewilderment. "Congratulations, Prickles," Betty said gently. "I look forward to working with you. With skills like yours, I have no doubt that my bakery is remaining in good hands. How does every Saturday morning sound?" Prickles blushed. "Thank you," he whispered. "I've always wanted to be a baker. Betty smiled kindly and whispered back, "Now you are one." Now that the competition was over, the remaining delicious entries were all up for grabs, and the crowds moved forwards towards the tables to help themselves. Of course, Prickles the Hedgehog's winning lavender loaf was the first thing to go, and every creature who devoured a piece declared that it was the tastiest bread they had enjoyed in a long time. It wasn't long before everything that had been cooked up for the contest was gobbled down, even the chocolate mud pie. Betty Badger's Sleepy Forest Bake-Off had been a roaring success. Everyone who attended had a great time, whether they were a competitor or a spectator. The competition had encouraged people to enjoy experimenting in their kitchens, and a love of baking was rekindled across Sleepy Forest. But best of all for Betty, she had found an excellent new chef to join her in her bakery kitchen. When Prickles' first morning on the job came around, the little hedgehog was initially nervous. But the Badger family soon made him feel right at home. Chip gave Prickles a tour of the kitchen, and Ginger showed him where all the ingredients were stored. Lavender described what Prickles could expect of a morning in the bakery, while Betty wrote today's menu on the kitchen chalkboard. When she was done, the little Badgers and Prickles gathered around to see what they would be whipping up in the kitchen this morning. To Prickles the Hedgehog's delight, his prize-winning lavender loaf was on the list. "I know customers will be very excited to experience your baking in the shop for the first time today," Betty explained. "So, what better way to show off what you can do than by selling your lavender loaf?" Prickles was grateful for the opportunity to share his delicious, herby, cheesy creation with the customers, and he grinned from spike to spike. "Please, can I help you make them, Prickles?" little Lavender requested. "After all, your loaves do share the same name as me." Prickles giggled and graciously accepted Lavender's offer of help. Together, Prickles and Lavender whipped up a dozen portions of prize-winning lavender loaf. The kitchen smelt positively scrumptious. The herbaceous scent of the fresh bread wafted through into the bakery shop and out of the front door, tantalizing the tummies of the keen customers already queuing up outside. Meanwhile, Betty, Chip, and Ginger baked up the remaining cakes, strudels, and pastries that were on today's menu. Then, when everything was ready, they carried it all out onto the shop floor and stocked up the shelves and cabinets. Betty Badger's bakery was ready to open for business. Betty, Chip, and Ginger took up their usual positions in the shop, whilst Prickles returned to the kitchen with Lavender to continue baking further batches of everything to restock the shelves with. The shop door flew open, and the team served their long line of eager customers. As expected, Prickles' lavender loaves flew off the shop shelves, and by the time the bakery closed, they were the most popular delicacy of the day. Betty was thrilled that Prickles' first day had been such a hit, and Prickles was ecstatic that his baking was finally being appreciated. Once the shop floor was cleared out and the kitchen was wiped down, the team of bakers celebrated with a leftover cupcake each. "Welcome to the team," Betty congratulated Prickles, clinking her cupcake against his in a toast. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity," Prickles thanked Betty gratefully. "It is such an honor to work in your bakery." But Betty assured Prickles that the honor was all hers. She counted her lucky stars that she got to share her dream of running a successful bakery with her children, and now also with a new friend.